Hello my friends, welcome to another video. Today I'm going to talk about some interesting stuff. So I'm going to talk about card design from my perspective, and I'm going to look over some of the cards that Magic the Gathering recently did. About a month ago or something around that time frame, there was a potential ban list for Magic the Gathering Standard. I actually haven't played Magic the Gathering Standard in a long time, so it's something that I'm not that familiar with. But there were three cards that were kind of looked at by most of the player bases cards that people expected to have banned. So I want to look at these cards and use them as examples. And I actually haven't read fully most of these cards, so I'm kind of reacting a little bit to this. I want to have a look at these cards and talk about where imbalance comes from in card games. One colorless, one red, so 2 mana. Emberheart Challenger for a creature mouse warrior. It's a 2/2. So stat line is it passes the vanilla test. So basically what that is years and years and years ago, players used to have this test to kind of say, is this card strong enough? Like, it needs to have at least stats equal to its cost. This card has stats equal to its cost, but nowadays when they print cards, they don't just make the card have stats equal to its cost and say that that's a strong enough card, because stats kind of don't matter anymore. Of course they do. Like, if you print a 1 mana 30/30, then it's gonna cause some problems. Here we go. Okay, so let's talk about, before I start talking about other cards and why stats are arbitrary, because that sounds kind of random. You're like, why are stats arbitrary? Why do they not matter? This is why they don't matter. You basically have, this is the going rate for instantaneously destroy any target creature. So my question is this: if a card like this exists, does toughness matter? And the answer is no, because Go for the Throat does not factor in how much health the card has. Unsummon, 1 blue mana, send a creature back to its owner's hand, and yet it is literally 1 mana to just bounce it back. So biggest thing here is you have arbitrary effects. You can just destroy a creature and it just costs a set amount of mana. Any card you have that costs more than this, let's say I play a creature that costs more than this is why effects are valued over stats. Because if I play a card that costs 3 mana, 4 mana, 5 mana, and it has really high stats, that doesn't matter, because it's just going to die to removal, which sounds like it used to be considered like an arbitrary and silly argument. Oh, that dies to removal. But it's become more and more valid, because with cards like Go for the Throat, you can just destroy target creatures, so your creatures are not going to stick around. It's not based off of their toughness. It's not Go for the Throat deals 5 damage to target non-artifact creature, or destroy target non-artifact creature or creature with, you know, toughness 7 or less. Like, even that would be more restrictive than what this is. So yeah, the basic idea here is, in order for a card to be valid, a card has to have abilities that are separate instances of cards, like token summoning or getting you to draw another card, or something like that. Something that separates the card itself from the effect that you're getting, because otherwise what you end up having is this situation where your cards aren't good enough because they don't split themselves in half. And if a card doesn't split itself in half, then it just gets killed by Go for the Throat, and then your card sucks. It has haste, so we're immediately talking about like the vanilla test and stats, and then immediately we have haste. So this creature is a 2 mana 2/2 with haste, so it passes the vanilla test, and then it also has the ability to attack right away. That's great. Okay, let's give it prowess too. So this is a big thing about card game balance, is this card has the keyword. This is a very important distinction that I want to talk about at length. I could go for hours about this, so I probably shouldn't talk about it too much. We have the word whenever here. And whenever is a very poisonous word when it comes to balance. And it's also extremely inspecific and vague. It doesn't say after you cast a non-creature spell or before you cast a non-creature spell. It's not telling you when exactly this triggered effect is occurring. It's saying at some point when a non-creature spell is cast. Does this happen first or second? In Magic it happens first, which should mean that the card should say before you cast a non-creature spell, which means when you go to cast a non-creature spell, this thing happens first. And that is how it works, but that's not what it says on the card. So this, you know, reading the card explains the card thing also kind of falls away as well here, which is bad for new players. So already in terms of design, this card's hard to understand just by reading it. Whenever, when is whenever? When does whenever trigger? This prowess trigger, it triggers whenever I cast a non-creature spell. When is that? Here's the other thing too. This is arbitrary because the number of non-creature spells I can cast in a given turn is absolutely variant. I could cast 800 non-creature spells. Well, not literally. I could probably cast like 30 non-creature spells if that's something I want to do in a turn, which would mean this card would get plus 30 until end of turn. Or I could cast 1, or I could cast 0, and the number could be anywhere in that range. So when you're balancing a card game, it's pretty much impossible to balance a game when you have an effect that has that much variance. Prowess could mean this creature's power and toughness is any number, higher or lower. And it kind of gets around Go for the Throat in a way because your opponent's going to have to tap out at some point. They're going to have to spend all their mana. Then they're not going to be able to cast Go for the Throat, and this card has haste. So you can attack right away. So you immediately have that issue. So we already have issues. And then Valiant is the next ability. Now, I've never read this part of the ability, so I'm curious how this works. Valiant. So again, we have, this is the second instance of this card saying whenever on it. Whenever Emberheart Challenger becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn, exile the top card of your library. Until end of turn, you may play that card. So that is card advantage. So this card is crazy. This card is so crazy. And I see why it is breaking the game, actually. When I read it, I'm like, oh my gosh. So card advantage is normally the strongest thing that you could ever print. In my game, I had to charge a very high amount of mana just for the effect of draw a card. And I had to be very careful about that. I went through lots of testing with this. But the basic thing is, card draw has to be extremely limited, and this is free. This is free card draw. Let's talk about how I would fix it. Let's talk about how I would fix it, because that's I think really where things get more interesting. I don't want to be mean, but this is bad design, and it's bad design for a few reasons. It is arbitrary, it feels random, it has ridiculous triggered effects. So let's start from the top and work through this card. So I think the most important thing to consider when balancing a card is to make everything have a valid cost. There needs to be some kind of reasonable benchmark for what things cost, and you need to follow that in order to have a balanced game. You can't have a balanced game if you just decide randomly whatever the stats are going to be. You have to say, okay, the stats are going to be this is what it's going to be. Now, haste is going to be based off the attack value of the card. So maybe we want to make this a 2/1. And maybe we want to make it 3 mana. That's what I'm thinking right away. So 3 mana for a 2/1 with haste. I love Prowess. It's funny because I have always enjoyed it, despite the fact that I think it's terribly balanced. So I would just say once during each of your turns. That's all you would do with that. Just once during each of your turns. Just put a limit on it so that it's not too crazy. Valiant is literally heroic, I think, as well. Like, isn't Valiant just heroic from Theros block? Whenever Emberheart Challenger becomes the target of a spell or ability you control for the first time each turn. I missed that. Okay, so that actually has the once during each of your turn clause, and I didn't realize it. So that's actually a huge win for the card. In my opinion, I think if they just literally made it a 2 mana 2/1 with haste with Prowess, but Prowess was only once during each of your turns, I think that would be honestly a solid and fun card. Just like that. I would just separate it. Boom. Like that. And then I would say, okay, if you want to make it like a 3 mana version with this Valiant once during each of your turns thing, then that would probably be fine. So this is just the thing. Difference of 1 mana minus 1 toughness. That's all I would basically do. And make sure Prowess is limited to once per turn, because Prowess being unlimited is arbitrary. So yeah, let's see. How long have I been recording? How long is this goddamn video right now? Does it tell me how long? 18 minutes! Dear Lord. Oh my gosh. Okay. I just finished recording my first little bit on talking about Emberheart Challenger, and I realized that I talked for 18 minutes straight about the card, and I think that if I want to cover 3 cards in one video, I'd better hurry it up. So let's make this a lot more succinct. So Nowhere to Run, 2 mana, 1 colorless, 1 black. It is Flash, so this is an instant speed enchantment card. When Nowhere to Run enters, target creature an opponent controls gets -3/-3 until end of turn. Creatures your opponents control can be the targets of spells and abilities as though they didn't have hexproof. Ward abilities of those creatures don't trigger. Ward is basically the answer to that issue I talked about before, where if a card costs more than 2 mana, in order to get around an effect such as Go for the Throat, Terminate, that kind of stuff, destroy target creature. If a card can't separate itself from its original card by either drawing you new cards or having additional effects, that card just gets removed and that card sucks. So stats kind of don't matter in that sense, because if you're paying mana for stats, you're wasting mana. Their answer to how to fix that was to say, let's make it so that cards have Ward now. So they have a protective ability that helps their stats matter because now cards can have the ability to defend themselves a little bit. The problem with that is this. They ended up printing many cards with Ward that also split themselves up into multiple effects. So a card that's like, it has Ward, but it also draws you cards. It also has a passive ability. It also has a triggered ability. It all has all this stuff. So instead of Ward being used to make cards' stats matter, instead, it ended up getting used to make the cards that already split themselves up even better against removal. So that became a huge problem. And so they had to print this. And this is a band-aid on an effect that they shouldn't have had to print in the first place, because that was a band-aid on an effect that they shouldn't have had to print in the first place. They shouldn't have had to print destroy any creature unilaterally. They shouldn't have had to print Ward to deal with that problem, and they shouldn't have had to split up card effects into card draw and all this other stuff on top of getting a creature because of how prevalent removal is. And then now they have to put this in because the Ward stuff was getting too annoying, and then no one can actually remove anything, and so now you have to run Nowhere to Run, and then that pushes all the Ward cards out of the game, which is just, this is power creep on power creep, basically. The Ward cards have an advantage over every card that doesn't have Ward, and every card kind of should have some kind of mana value protection effect with how pushed removal is in this game. An example of a card I think is excellent, Abrupt Decay. This card is well designed. I love this card's design, and I want to talk about why this card is better than Nowhere to Run. Just real fast, let's go. I gotta hurry up because I'm talking for way too long. Destroy target non-land permanent with converted mana cost 3 or less. So the interesting thing about this card is, by restricting the effect by costing 3 or less, it makes it, instead of 3 or more, because this is really important, a card like, I think it's Valorous Stance, it destroys something with toughness 4 or greater. And that's arbitrary. But this isn't arbitrary. This is based upon something which is a reasonable cost for players to play. Abrupt Decay cannot delete something that costs so much. So if a player chooses to play a card that costs higher than the standard removal card, then the standard removal card can't remove it. And that makes sense. That is good balance. That is logical. It's great. And it works. So this is a very cool card, very well designed. Really, you need to make everything linearly, mathematically equivalent. And despite the fact that I think that this card is excellent design, I also think that this card is too pushed as well. But if you look at a card like Abrupt Decay, and then you look at a card like Nowhere to Run, you just think, oh my god, where has the balance gone? Like, what have we lost? Oh boy. So this card is Card Advantage. Like I mentioned before, Card Advantage needs to be expensive, because otherwise this just breaks the entire game. And this, of course, broke the entire game. The thing is with this is you're cheating. This isn't just 2 mana draw 2 cards. This is 2 mana draw like 7 cards, and it's just ridiculous because they can cheat this effect too, because if you play any of the Overlord cards, any of the Impending cards, any card that has a cost reduction effect, the game considers that to be a card with mana value 5 or greater. It shouldn't. Why does the game say, if I play a 6 mana card and I pay only 1 mana for that card, why is it that it says, oh, that counts? You draw a card. That's stupid. This condition, whenever you cast a spell with mana value 5 or greater, draw a card, that is absolutely freaking random. That is completely, absolutely random. Doesn't make any sense. The way I would do this card is I'd keep it 2 mana, and I would just say draw a card, and then I would say something like, so this is very specific. if you've paid 5 mana or greater. You don't make it conditional on you've played a card that has mana value 5 or greater, because then you're just cheating the mana costs. You're, paying an alternate cost for a card, and then it counts the card. So this specifically says if you've paid 5 mana or greater for another spell this turn, draw 2 cards instead. This way, you basically, and I honestly could see this as 1 mana in Magic. In other card games, I wouldn't push it this far, but I think I could see this effect at 1 mana. It's very fair. It's very reasonable. 1 mana, draw 2 cards is insane, but the condition is also quite significant. I have to be at least 6 mana to be able to play this card. It's a green card, so green has a ramp. That really fits with the flavor and vibes of green. This card would be fun. Like, I'd probably make it a sorcery, just to be specific. But yeah, I think a card like this would be really fun if it was designed like this. But the main thing that I want to get through with this video is the problem with card game design is that it's arbitrary and that it's not specific. A card doesn't pay costs. Cards don't have costs, and they don't have rewards for those costs that are set in stone. So any one card, a designer can just randomly decide, I guess it'll have this effect, I guess it'll have that effect, I feel like this should work, and then they just randomly throw stuff together, and then this is what you get. And it's lazy, and it's not good design, and it results in garbage like these cards. And these cards have been breaking the game. Almost all of them feature, in fact, every card that I'm talking about today that I'm looking at has these features where there's something arbitrary about it. It either just unilaterally shuts something off without any cost paid to do so. They're all above rate, every single one of these cards. So what I mean by that is what you pay and what you get don't line up, and what you pay is less than what you get. You get way more out of these cards than what you pay for them, and that's a huge problem. And that's literally the thing with card games, is card games don't set their costs into mathematical lines to make everything uniform. Now, you can make everything uniform and make everything fun. And that's kind of what I wanted to show with me designing some of these cards, like redesigning them. You can make really fun and interesting and exciting effects that people would enjoy playing, like my new version of Up the Beanstalk, which hopefully I can still pull up. Here it is. I think this would be awesome. As a green player, like, I would love to be like, oh, because I've played early game, I can say, oh, I'm going to play this card right now because I actually need to dig through my deck, so I'm just going to pay 1 mana to cycle this card. That's fine. Oh, actually now later in the game, this card's a lot better because now that I've ramped, I can play my big green cards, which in a perfect world wouldn't be randomly subject to unilateral destruction effects and would instead be harder to remove, because imagine a world where removal was based on a card's toughness. Like, the tougher a card is, the tougher it is to remove. Insane concept. I'm playing my big minions, and my big minions, because I played them, I'm getting rewarded by this conditional effect. Oh, I get to draw an extra card. Wonderful, that's super fun. So green players would love this effect. It would be fun, it would be interactive, there would be back and forth between the two players. You could mess with things. This card actually gets around counters with the way it's written, but, because if you've paid 5 mana or greater for another, I'm going to specify, it should be creature spell. I would go with creature spell. But this doesn't, see, this is the thing with Up the Beanstalk. Up the Beanstalk also doesn't care if it's a creature or not. You can cast instants and sorceries for this. I mean, what is this card doing? This card is too flexible and too free. You're not paying costs, and you're not getting rewarded for paying costs in this card game. You're getting rewarded for playing the cards that the designers didn't think about, that the designers were lazy about. And, it makes me miss the old days with Magic, but also, like, even in the old days, they had all of these problems. This game is kind of built upon a foundation of flawed thinking. It is possible to balance a card game perfectly, and the way you do it, or at least part of the way that it's done, is by avoiding these mistakes. Don't make things arbitrary. Don't make things have random costs. Don't make things trigger an unlimited number of times per turn, and don't make cards like this. Don't make cards like this. Oh man, it's such a mess. It's such a mess. You just make it unilateral, or not non-unilateral. You make it dependent, like Abrupt Decay. Abrupt Decay said destroy something that costs 3 or less. That is quite reasonable. That makes sense, you know. So yeah, it should cost based off of like deal damage to a creature. That's a great way. It's a system they have in the game that they should use. Destroy something that costs 3 or less. That's something they should use. But these cost reduction effects and these cards that break when paired with them, to the Urank with those. That's a reference for those who get it. Yeah, so thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.